let's talk about some legislator. There are laws for businesses in South Africa that promote diversity and equality. Do these need to change?
You're absolutely right. There are laws. In fact, there are a number of laws that seek to promote diversity, that seeks to promote more representativity in relation to gender as well. And maybe just to touch on two important pieces that are also considered to be very controversial. The first would be the Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment Act. And yes, that act and the legislative instruments that are published in terms of that act sets targets for representativity across all levels of companies and businesses operating in South Africa. The interesting thing to note about that piece of legislation is that the focus of that piece of legislation is on race rather than gender. Although there is some elements that focus on gender as well, but in particular in relation to women that are not white. So yes, there is some focus there. I don't think it's sufficient focus. And of course, it excludes white women. We also have the Employment Equity Act, which has been implemented for a long time now. It's very much of an enabling type of framework, which allows companies to produce plans for representativity, again, across race, but also across gender. But again, I think the focus there is also a lot on race rather than gender. And so what I'm trying to say is that there may be a need for focus in particular on gender. And I understand that that is what government is looking at now. And so we've seen a new bill being introduced into Parliament and in fact being agreed to recently by the National Assembly, the Women and Gender Empowerment Bill. And that seems to be a new focus now.
All right, well, Safia, you mentioned that there's a new bill being introduced in Parliament that will help women to gain a better representation in higher level management and CEOs and on boards. Is there anything else that the government should be doing that they're not?
I think the government itself is doing as much as it can do in the circumstances. You know, they're looking and considering policy instruments. They're looking at legislative instruments like this new bill that I referred to. And you know, themselves in relation to their own state-owned companies and in relation to, say, representation at Parliament, you know, gender is at the forefront of the issues that government is considering and looking at. I think that it now falls at the hands of corporate South Africa, quite frankly. There's a lot more to be done at that level in relation to representativity and ensuring representativity. And I think there's good business reason for corporate South Africa to be looking at gender representativity more closely.
What are some of those reasons? I
mean, if we just consider the statistics that I referred to earlier on, 51% of South Africa's population are women, you know, and that's the type of statistic that we see globally. That means more than 50% of the stakeholders of most large companies or businesses operating in South Africa are in fact women. What do I mean by that? How do I unpack that? Quite simply, if more than 50% of the population of South Africa are women, it means that potentially more than 50% of the consumers of goods or services of corporate South Africa are in fact women. It means that potentially more than 50% of the employees of corporate South Africa may not be at leadership level, but certainly at junior management level and below are in fact women. It means that institutional shareholders who are the majority shareholders on most JSE listed companies have as their beneficiaries. I'm talking about the pension funds, the provident funds, the banks. Most of the pension fund holders, deposit takers, deposit givers to banks and so forth are women. These are the stakeholders of corporate South Africa. So how are we supposed to appease these stakeholders if we are not representing these stakeholders at important levels of the company? That's what I mean when I say that there are good business reasons for ensuring that we have representativity and diversity at the highest levels of corporate South Africa. I want to just add one more thing. I think, and I'm quite a believer of this, that representativity means diversity. And I think diversity also equals creative thinking and innovation for companies. And the way corporates can evolve, survive, and grow is through innovation.